I've often wondered what the most commonly asked questions were about Formula One. And then one of my staff came to me and said, look, I've searched on alsoasked.com and the number one question asked at Google was how to... Let's get back to the number one asked question of Google about Formula One. It is, how tall is too tall for F1? There is no specific number. There's no 6'3" or 194 centimeters or whatever. It's whatever you can fit into the car. So every car is designed for the driver. And that was very evident when Lewis Hamilton, who is significantly shorter than George Russell, stepped out of the Sakhir Grand Prix, and George Russell had to use that same car. So they had to do a lot of work to fit George into the cockpit. So who's the tallest driver to ever have raced in Formula One? I've found a couple of references. Hans-Joachim Stuck was apparently 194 centimetres, while Englishman Justin Wilson came in at 190.5 centimetres and raced for Minardi back in 2003. If we dig deeper into this list of questions, you get this one. Is there a height limit for F1 drivers? No, there's not. If you can fit in the car and you can drive it fast, you've got yourself a drive. Who is the tallest F1 driver in 2020? There are actually two. It's a dead heat. Alex Albon and Esteban Ocon, both 186 centimetres. That's my height, although they're considerably lighter. These questions about drivers' heights has really floored me. Why would people be so interested in that, I thought? Another question that's come up a lot, how tall is Lando Norris? Well, he's the shortest of the 2020 drivers, measuring just 170 centimetres. Another question along the same lines, are Formula One drivers short? I think if you have a look at this complete list, you'll say, no, they're about average height. So let's start at the top with Alex and Esteban. Next up is Antonio Giovinazzi at 185 centimetres, the same height as George Russell and Nicholas Latifi. Next up, Lance Stroll, 182 centimetres, Max Verstappen, 180 centimetres, along with two other drivers, Daniil Kvyat and Romain Grosjean, and then Charles Leclerc at 179 centimetres. So that's 1 to 10. Let's look at 11 to 20, kicking off with Daniel Ricciardo at 178 centimetres, Carlos Sainz and Pierre Gasly the same height, 177, Sebastian Vettel, Sergio Perez, and Kimi Raikkonen at 175 centimetres. Lewis Hamilton is 174 centimetres, along with Kevin Magnussen. Valtteri Bottas, 173 centimetres. And yes, our shortest driver is McLaren's Lando Norris at 170 centimetres. Another thing regarding drivers' heights is that obviously the taller you are, the heavier you're going to be. And F1 has a limit of 80 kilograms per driver. So if you're 79 kilograms or 75, you still have to race at 80 kilograms. If you're an 85 kilogram driver, that's 5 extra kilograms your car's going to have to lug around a track, and that's going to cost you time. So taller drivers, because of their weight and their height, have a tougher time getting a gig in Formula One. Back to this list of alsoasked.com questions. How tall is Nico Hulkenberg? Yes, he's not on the 2020 drivers list, but he's 185 centimetres. And going down the questions, you can see how tall is Lance Stroll? Well, we've gone through that. How tall is Esteban Ocon? Yeah, done that one as well. What about this one? How much do F1 drivers make? I did a video going back, probably 2 months ago now, which runs through what the industry thinks each driver is being paid. But remember, there's things like private sponsorships, team sponsorships, there's bonuses for winning or just simply getting on the podium. But it's pretty much agreed that Lewis is on the most money with tens of millions of dollars and Nicholas Latifi is on the least. And if you have a look below, you'll find a link to that particular video. Do F1 drivers listen to music? The question's a bit vague. Are you talking about in the car? Are you talking about outside the car at the track? You're talking about away from the track? Certainly they don't listen to music in the car. They've got their earpieces in there listening to their engineer. But outside of the car, yes. And in fact, on the grid, prior to the start of a race, you'll always see Daniel Ricciardo with music, and he's one of the last to leave after the national anthem. He's always putting on his headphones and just getting into the groove. Lewis Hamilton will often have headphones in, as do many of the other drivers. This snapshot of questions was taken for the end of last season. So a question like, is Nico leaving F1? Looks like he probably is, unless he happens to manage to snare the seat that Lewis Hamilton hasn't yet signed up for at Mercedes. How tall is David Coulthard? He's 182 centimetres and he's certainly one of the best dressed fellows in the paddock, always looks debonair and dapper, is the Scottish ex-racing great. How old is Lance Stroll? He's 22, born in October of 1998. Who is the youngest F1 driver? Well, that would be Lando Norris, who celebrated his 21st birthday in November. And not that it's on the list of questions commonly asked of Google, who is the oldest? It's obviously Kimi Räikkönen. And since we've mentioned drivers' ages, let's go through the whole field here, starting with the youngest, Lando Norris. Right through to the oldest, Kimi Räikkönen. How old is Claire and Stroll? Claire Ann is Lance's mum, but bizarrely, how does that come up as a commonly asked question? Who sponsors my F1 videos? That's not really a question on this list, but since you've asked, it's Canity.com, the world's best online staff training. Have a look at it, Canity.com. How do F1 drivers pee? Like you and me, as a male, they'll probably stand up at the urinal before the start of a race. And yes, they do occasionally wee in their race suits when it's necessary. Obviously, if a race goes a little bit longer than normal and they're busting to go, it'll happen. And when it does happen, that driver's trainer will normally take the wet race suit back to the team manager, who arranges to have them washed. Here's an interesting one. Do the drivers get to keep their trophies? It depends on their contract. Someone like a Lewis Hamilton is reported to get all of his trophies because he's had that negotiated in his contract, whereas someone like a Max Verstappen or any Red Bull driver normally doesn't get their trophies. They go to the team, although they can, if they want, buy a copy of the trophy, in which case they go back to whoever made the trophies and say, right, I'll have another one, please. Might cost them $15,000–$20,000 US. Why did Kimi Räikkönen leave Ferrari? They didn't want him anymore. They wanted Charles Leclerc. Do F1 drivers use both feet? Yes. There's a brake on the left, there's an accelerator on the right, the clutch is on the steering wheel, and they only really use that to take off at the start. Interestingly, it's very tight at the bottom where the feet are in the cockpit, and that was evident at the Sakir race when Lewis couldn't race and George Russell had to step into his car, and George said he had to use a size smaller racing shoe so he could fit his feet into that tight area. Do F1 drivers drink during the race? Almost all of them, yes. They have a system in the car that there is a reservoir of solution, and it's normally like a drink that the trainers make up. They put in there, it's fed by a pump into their mouths as they drive, and they press a button on the steering wheel and that feeds the fluid into their mouth. But occasionally, and this came up in a recent video I did on F1 trainers, and I'll put the link below here, it was mentioned to me that sometimes the engineers say, look, we need half a kilo of weight. Can you help us out? And perhaps instead of having a litre of fluid, perhaps have half a litre, in which case the trainer has to make that decision. Is that enough fluid for the driver during a race or a practice session? Obviously, if they say, look, we want to make up 0.2 of a second, so can you have no liquid in there? That would be probably a dumb move, because your driver's going to end up perhaps at the end of a hot race almost delirious. So any saving in weight is going to be counteracted by the fact that your driver can't drive properly. Some interesting questions there in the most often asked questions of Google about Formula One. Thanks for watching. If you've liked the video, please hit the like button, subscribe if you haven't done so. And if you want to be notified when I release new videos, just hit the notifications button and you can join as a member. You'll find these F1 driver photo books at kimillman.com. There's 23 that you can choose from, and they're sent to almost anywhere in the world. You'll find my best pics at Instagram at kimillman. And if you're looking for photos, you can own any of my pictures, digital or print if you live in Australia, at kimillman, at prostarpics.com. Thanks for getting right through to the end of the video. I appreciate your following, and if you've got comments, whack them below. If they're interesting, I'll respond to them. Hey, thanks for watching. Stay passionate. And that's my wife heading out in her car. I don't even know whether you would have heard that. Perhaps I should have just kept going. This is a colourful scarf, another one of my wives. But otherwise it'd be just too white and daggy.